Hey everyone, welcome to the stream. This is Coding It Live, the stream, and I'm coding it wrong, known in real life as Josh Justice, but as I always say, you can watch and decide for yourself if you agree I'm coding it wrong. Oh, and now I'm talking in my ear because it's the first time streaming on YouTube. But that's good because I was hoping to test that the audio was coming through. First time on YouTube here, so please let me know if you're watching in the chat or live or watching it later. Let me know how it goes. I want to kind of enhance this over time. But let's talk about what we're going to be talking about on the stream today. First, I do want to give a thanks though. So I work at Test Double. It's a software consultancy. It's a great place to work. I love it. They're the reason I get to have free time to do stuff like this and work with a bunch of super smart people and super caring people that care about making software better. And so if you learn anything on the video today that you would kind of like to have that kind of help with you and your project, Testable would love to hear from you. So please reach out and let us know. I or someone I work with would love to join your team. So as to what we're working on today, I have an app called Riverbed. I released that earlier this year. It's kind of a culmination of a lifetime of being obsessed with personal information management. And sort of it's a personal database. So this is just a sort of a sample user I have, but you could track to-dos in here. And as you go through, you can just manage data and add fields. So just like I have a to-do here that I can mark as complete or defer it, I can also edit it. And I can edit the fields and what they store and how they work. And even configure actions. So you kind of set what happens when you click on a button and stuff like that. And not just to-dos, but all kinds of different information. I use it for tracking links, bookmarks, life log, just kind of tracking locations I go to with geolocation markers, and all kinds of cool stuff. So it's available for iOS and Mac as well as for the web. And today on the web, we're going to be adding React test coverage. And let me show you why. So I have a Cypress test suite that pretty thoroughly covers the app at a end-to-end testing level. And so it goes through the main cases of the application there. I also have some unit tests. And as you notice here, well, I don't know if you can notice from the file extensions, but if you look, this is the utils folder, this is the enums folder, logic, and a utility function inside a screens folder. But I'm not actually testing the individual components. So I don't have detailed unit level test coverage for the individual components. That was sort of an intentional decision. And so let's talk about why that is. I did not write the tests first. So even though that's something that I care about. But for this application, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to pull it off. I wasn't sure that it was actually going to be able to be useful. Like it's kind of ambitious for like a one-person project to do personal information management and build all these things. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to make something that I would want to use. Turns out I got there, which is super exciting. I also wasn't sure about the technologies. And so at first I built the app with React Native Web, which is React Native lets you build for iOS and Android, and React Native Web adds web support, so you can target all those platforms with one code base. And that was really great for prototyping, and it works great for a lot of purposes, but some of the specific user experiences things that I wanted to accomplish, I really needed native iOS to be able to do it. And so I I built a native iOS and Mac client, and then the React Native code I migrated over to React for the web. So my Cypress tests covered that. They kept passing, maybe I had to tweak them a little bit, but they confirmed as I migrated the code base from React Native to React for the web that everything kept passing. So Cypress did give me a great degree of test coverage. But I didn't in React Native do detailed component level testing because I wasn't sure I was going to stick with React Native Web, and turns out I did not. Now that I'm on React on the web, I feel confident. It's stabilized, it has what I need, and I'd love to have that detailed level test coverage for a few different reasons. And let me look at my list for the reasons that I have for that. So I want to identify bugs in edge cases. I already have tests of some of these vanilla JavaScript functions for kind of detailed logic to catch edge cases there. Some of these functions are things that I'm just not confident I can build it right unless I have tests from the start. And so I almost always use test-driven development for those. But my components have edge cases as well, and I'd love to use lower-level tests, component tests, with React Testing Library to cover those. I want to be able to refactor my code to be simpler, so it's easier to work with in the future. Also, I love having vanilla JavaScript that I can test directly, and that will help me if I do ever move off of React to something else. Also, just with the asynchrony of React and React's rendering model, I've come to believe even more so in the advice that I get from testers of decades past that, hey, the more code you can write that's decoupled from the framework, the better. Now, I don't know exactly how I want to extract vanilla JavaScript from React, and I didn't want to like make a decision from the start, but I want to see what patterns emerge as we go. And when I've got good component tests, they can cover me to make sure the component still works as I extract vanilla JavaScript and write tests for that directly. So that'll be a big help, and I'm looking forward to learning about that. I want to remove unnecessary dependencies. So with this software running on the side, I'm not looking to monetize it, and so I want it to be very sustainable to build. And so if I have some dependencies pulled in that I don't need, it would be great to be able to remove them. And maybe I can just custom code the functionality instead. My tests will help with that. Finally, I would love to change the styling approach. So I'm using Material UI right now, and it provides some nice animations and stuff like that. But I've noticed this runs a little slowly on older devices. I have an older iPad that I use that it runs kind of slowly on. I'm actually working with vintage computers right now, vintage Macintoshes, and there's modern browsers for those, but it runs a little slow on those as well. And being such simple information management, it would be great if the performance was better. I think it would be faster and snappier on modern machines as well. There's other later stuff as well. Maybe I'll migrate to TypeScript. Maybe I'll try a different build tool, Vite. Maybe I'll try going to Next or Remix at some point in the future and see how it goes. But detailed test coverage will cover me in all those cases. So I want to add thorough test coverage to my application. A note before we jump in. So I've also written a book about test-driven development. Clearly you can see I don't always do test-driven development, and the introduction to the book talks about that. It's not for everything. But as you see as we go through together, my view of testing and what we're looking for is very influenced by test-driven development. And I think doing test-driven development is the best way to learn how to thoroughly cover your code with tests. So I have a $10 off coupon for the book. You can see it there, the URL up there. And you'll also be able to get to that coupon from the link that's in the footer in just a second, anytime on the stream. In the recording, it'll be in the notes as well. So feel free to check out that book. There's a free sample for the intro chapters with a lot of background on testing and test-driven development that I think you'll find interesting. So with that, I'm going to go off of video. I'm feeling a bit under the weather, so I'm going to go off video for some of this time. We'll just do a desktop. So see you on audio. And let's jump into the code together. So here is the code base for Riverbed, and it is open source actually. So the link to it, let me stick it up on the screen in case anybody's watching now and wants to see. Really, if you're logged into Riverbed, it's also free to use. So if you go to riverbed.app, you can create a free account and give it a try. But here's the link, github.com/codingitwrong/riverbed. Oh, iOS, that link is not right. Maybe we can change that. Go to Riverbed Web. This is the web client, and here's where you can get the source code. When I push up the changes we make here, you'll see it there. So if you want to play around with this code or the test locally, feel free to do so. Let's make the change to that navigation link real quick. That is not covered by tests. Let's see here, is that navigation bar? In fact, we can just search for Riverbed iOS. Source code. Yeah, there it is. That link was wrong. The things you learn. Oh, so I had this running on the server here, but I have this running locally as well. So let's pull up the local version so we can give it a try. And let's just make sure that link works. I probably want that in another tab as well, but yeah, there we go. All right, so let's make a new branch to make these changes in. I'm going to do a new tab with the current profile. And we'll talk about tooling as we go. Let's see here, test coverage. And we'll just say fix link to source code. I like to do lots of small commits. All right, so you can see I have just the yarn test. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, the yarn test command will actually watch the test and make changes live. It'll run it live, and we can narrow down and run on individual things. So let's jump into the code and see what will be most useful to add test coverage for. Just starting at the start of the code base, because with some qualifications I'll say as we go, I really want to cover all the functionality for all of my application code. And so I really just want to start at the top of the source code and add tests for everything. So under auth here, we have some vanilla JavaScript that is used for login purposes, OAuth login, and a login form. That I've copied and pasted from elsewhere, but I don't think testing vanilla JavaScript is going to be, well, it's hooks, but I don't think testing that will be the most interesting thing for the stream. So I'm going to move past that and come back to it later and jump into components. So let's just take these one at a time. So under here we have field types. Field types are the different types of data you can set up on your form to do different things. So you can enter text or a number, a geolocation, date or date time, or a multiple choice. Under this lazy folder, I have some lazy loading of separate Webpack bundles. I'm using Webpack to build because it's good enough until I need otherwise. And let's see this date editor component. So in here, we're taking in some props, but we're rendering out date picker here, which comes from MUI X date pickers. Those are really nice, incidentally. I love those a lot. It's a great experience. And so we have to provide this date localization provider so it knows how to kind of just do the date logic on it. And let's see what I do. So in the date picker, what happens in this component? What are the responsibilities of this component? It configures date localization, okay. It forwards along the label. So the label I provide here gets forwarded on to the third-party date picker component. That's going to be the text string that's shown, of course. And then for the value field, I take in a value, and then if it's present, I pass it to day.js, which is a great date parsing library. And so that's going to take a string value because in my system, all these values are stored as strings in the back end so that they, no matter what field types I have now or in the future, they're all stored consistently. So that converts it from a date string into day.js object, which is what's used by date picker for working with the date. And then on change, so whenever the date changes from interacting with the date picker, sorry for these pop-ups. I am used to VS Code now, but these pop-ups are super annoying. So we get a day.js object back, and then what I'm doing is taking a utility of mine and converting it to the format we use on the server, and then I'm setting the value to that. So what these two props do together is, from the outside where we use date editor component, the value coming in and the set value coming back out are both working in terms of date strings that my server uses. So the conversion back and forth to date objects happens inside here, and I don't need to worry about it. We also have a disabled prop, and we have, let's see here, slot props. That's configuring some of the child components of date picker. And one of them is we pass along the style. I wonder if that property is right. I have to look into that. I pass along the style as well as an ID that's used for testing elsewhere. So many of these props are just forwarding things along. The real functionality added by this component is converting the value on both ends from a string to a date object. So when I think about writing a test for this, I don't feel the need to test styling. That's not very useful usually to test in unit tests with React Testing Library. And I don't feel the need to test passing along of props unchanged. I will tell in using the app if that doesn't work. Really, if I make a test for that, that feels like just duplicating my typing. But the functionality I want to test is the value translation from a string to date and back. So let's write a test for that. Date editor component spec.js. And I haven't worked in this code base for a while, so we're going to see live any struggles that it might have. So I'm going to describe date editor component. And when I think about tests, I was just reading some old blog posts about the origin of test-driven development and actually the behavior-driven development style that Jest is modeled after when you use describe and when you use it. And a motivation to this approach is thinking about tests in terms of specification. You want to specify fully the functionality of the code you're testing. In fact, in TDD, you specify first, and then you implement to match the specification. But even adding tests afterwards, I want to specify the component. I want to fully cover the functionality, and I want to think in terms of what does it do. Now, the string-based descriptions for Jest are very helpful for that. So I can say, well, what is date editor component? I can say it displays dates based on a date string. Maybe that's not the best way to say that, but that helps. So I want to provide this. So let's just start writing out what we need. And I'm sure we'll need some setup stuff and things like that, but I'm just going to write the code I wish I had. I'm going to import, import's not working, import render from testing library. Oh, I wonder if I have React Testing Library installed. I do not. All right, great. Well, we'll add that in. That's the extreme I went to, is that I had not even installed React testing library. I think I removed it intentionally. Yarn add dev testing library React. And we'll see what other dependencies I'm missing as well. I should have checked my book for the dependencies that I usually set up for this testing. We'll find more as we need it. All right, so render. And we'll just see. If something errors out, we'll go to the React testing library docs to see what we need. We're going to render out the date editor component. And I'm not actually sure what date format I use on the server, so I'm just going to check the running application to see which of these have a date. Links probably does. Cards is the term for it. And when I check this page, I check the response. Attributes. Okay, so a date, there's a date editor and a date time editor. So date I actually would have remembered because that's a pretty simple format. So let's just say date string. And we'll just do today, 2020. Let's not do today in case anything defaults to now or something like that. Let's say Halloween. Date editor component value equals date string. And then what do we want to check? Well, let's see what shows up on the screen, actually. Now, the date is not editable there. Let's see about to-dos. Yeah, here we go. So defer until. So if I had this set to Halloween. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this date field shows it as text. It's got some fanciness there. But I bet I'll be able to find a text input with 10/31/2023 shown on there. So let's try that. Expect screen get by let's check the reference here. I always forget this. What's the best way to query for that? Testing library get by display value. The current value of a form element. Yeah, so let's just try that. Display value 10/31/2023 to be visible. So if this passes, that means that this string is correctly turned into a date internally and then shows up on the screen in the formatted way. So let's see if that works. I wouldn't be surprised if we have more work to do, but let's save and let's switch over to the test running. And I'm just going to narrow this down, date editor. Document is not defined. Consider using the JS DOM test environment. Okay, so we need to set up JS DOM. Apparently I turned that off as I really wanted to limit down what I was testing. So let's set this up. This is an impromptu note about setting up React testing library, so that's fun. All right, so I have my jest config is here, and it is test environment JS DOM. I think I may need to pull in the dependency for that, but hopefully the error will tell me. Looks like I need to restart the test. Test environment jest environment JS DOM cannot be found. Make sure to install it separately. And so let's just make sure that really is what I think it is. I keep going to the wrong browser window. npm jest environment JS DOM. There we go. Yarn add dev JS DOM. I'm going to stop my Cypress test because they might be slowing things down a little bit. We get to do resolving packages on a stream. While this is installing, let me think ahead about what's coming next. And we can go ahead and write out tests with to-dos before we're ready. We'll say it.todo. We'll say sends, it calls, what's the name of that? Set value with a string formatted date upon change. So it's saying that's the other main functionality we want, is for it successfully to send the values back on set value. If our code here is missing, and we're going to try taking these things out to make sure they break the tests, then that won't work. All right, so this is coverage. Let's see if our tests are running now. Just as often been very easy to set up. Can I read properties of undefined reading ID? Okay, cool. So this is getting further. We've got a long set of errors here. That's probably the same error. Yeah, it is. So let's see what's happening here. So field is a prop that's passed as well, and code as written expects it to be there and expects an ID. And because I'm not using TypeScript, it's not forcing me in the editor to pass that in. I am not going with TypeScript yet on my side project. So instead, let's just pass this field as needed. Notice we're not passing label and disabled because the code doesn't blow up without that, but we'll pass in a field. And we'll just set that up here because I expect we'll be able to share that. ID 123. That should be enough to get past that error, so let's give it a try. And let me narrow down to date editor, so we're just running the one test. I might need to shrink the font size here since these errors are so long. Oh, did I not pass it in? I didn't pass it in. It's not enough just to define it. You do need to pass props. Expect to be visible is not a function. Yes, so I think that's, oh yeah, what's that? DOM helpers? Testing library DOM helpers, which is usually there in your code bases, and I'm just setting this up for the first time. Testing library DOM. Cool, so let's look up how to set this up. We add it. Oh, maybe that's all. Maybe that's all we need to do. Cool, let's give that a try. Yarn add dev testing library DOM. Expect to be visible is not a function. Okay, so that's not sufficiently set up. So let's take a look and see docs in more detail. Documentation, yes. Install. Oh yeah. Wait, no, React testing library, right? Oh, just DOM. No, that's what we want. So DOM yarn. All right, so we don't want testing library DOM doesn't need to be in here explicitly. So let's say yarn remove. Hopefully that doesn't remove the transitive dependency for that. Testing library just DOM. That's what we want. Yeah, there we go. There's our matchers that we want, and that just provides some extra realism, which is nice. Import it once, for example, in your test setup file. Yarn add dev just DOM. And then we'll import this in our test setup file. That is, do I not have a test setup file? All right. Setup tests. Import that, and then let's look at that syntax for doing a test setup file. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this will work. Module setup tests. Not found. Nope, Cypress, go away. We don't want you. Date editor. And it actually passed. So, something I often say when you're not doing test-driven development, you're writing the test afterwards, don't trust the test passing. We want to make sure it's not a false positive that is really confirming the behavior. So I expect that this test is confirming that my translation of the value string to a date object is working, or at least in whatever form that the date picker third-party component needs. So I expect that if I remove this line, that it's actually going to break. So let's make sure it does break. I delete that, the test runs, and check it out. It says, unable to find an element with a display value 10/31/2023. And if we dive in here, I think we can see, yeah, the input doesn't have a value at all. Great. Just to be fully thorough, let's just see if we're doing unnecessary work. Let's see, this might actually work fine. I haven't actually tried it. What if we just pass the value along without converting it to a date? I don't know what will happen. So let's find out. We run the code. Here we go. Yeah, uncaught type error. Value.isBefore is not a function. So the code is set up and it's expecting, because I think of this date localization provider adapter day.js, it's expecting a day.js object to be passed in. So I'm going to convert it to here. I do think I want to be thorough though, because this code is assuming there's a condition. It assumes that I need to pass null and not convert it to day.js if it's blank. So I don't know if that's actually needed. So let me first of all save this again and make sure the test starts passing again. Comment out that line. Let's say value equals day.js value. I think this will pass the current test. Let's see. Great, it does. So now let's think about this edge case. The idea was that I was thinking that, and I have the benefit of being the one that originally wrote this code, so I have some sense of what I was thinking. My thinking was that if value starts out as null or empty, wrapping it with day.js will not give me what I want. I think that actually returns the current day. So let's see if we can write a test to confirm that. Let's say it displays an empty field when the date is null. So that's what I want to happen, and we'll see if we need custom code for that or not. Copy and paste this. We'll just say value equals null. And we may be able to say, because there's just one field being rendered, get by display value empty string to be visible. Let me go back to the working code and see if that test even asserts correctly. Save this test. We'll do a dot only to run only this test just to keep things simple. And it passes. Displays an empty field when the date is null. So now, and let me make sure it fails if I have something in there. It should not find a field with ASDF. And that's because the input has a value of empty string. So I think we're correctly asserting on this. Let's just see if we replace this complex code with simpler code. Let's see if the test still passes or not. I bet it won't, but you never know with me. So, unable to find an element with display value empty string. So let's see what's happened. It actually outputs the value mmddyyyyy. That's really interesting. I want to check that in the running application just to see what that looks like. This is the local app. So if I create a new field, that's preset to today. Let me change the setting on that field. Initial. Oh yeah, so that's what's happening. That's the bug in the code. Initial value of today. So let me delete that. Let me put the working code back in. There's a lot of jumping back and forth here, which is what happens when you're not doing test-driven development. So here, this is the working functionality. I want, when I create this object, a null value is passed into the field. I want this to be empty. But if I switch this to this simpler version, it gets a day.js object. And let's check the docs actually to see, just so that I'm not just speculating. Day.js. Docs. Parse. Call day.js with one of the supported input types. Calling day.js without parameters returns a fresh day.js object with a current date and time. Day.js treats day.js null as invalid input. Huh. Well, so let me actually console.log what the value is here. Just kind of speculating to understand, or investigating to understand what the code does. I'm going to put, yeah, that's fine. Make sure this reloads. When I create a new object, value undefined. Gotcha. Okay. So just so happens I'm not passing a null, I'm passing an undefined, which is this. Day.js treats day.js undefined as day.js due to that function parameters default to undefined when not passed in. So we get now when we pass in undefined. But when in my code, when the value is undefined, I don't want it to show now. I want it to show null. Now I'm not actually sure what's happening in here in the test. The fact that it outputs mmddyyyyy, that may be some fanciness about JS DOM, or maybe it thinks it's highlighted or something like that. I'm not really sure, but at least when we put in the real functionality here, the test passes, and so it is confirming that it's passing in an empty string. So that's great. That's fully specifying the behavior of the value prop here, not its behavior in and of itself, but the externally visible behavior of the component based on that value prop. So I think we have the value prop handled. We don't need to group this in the test by value prop because that's that's an implementation detail of the component we don't need to show. Maybe we'll group them later for like what it displays. But for now, let's move on to the onChange property. So we say it, and we'll do it only to focus on it. It calls setValue with a string formatted date upon change. So let's just start out with our prop here. Then we'll say we are going to need, we'll do it inline here, const user equals user event. And I think we're going to need to add the user event library because I don't think we have that yet. Yeah, I do know that one. Yarn add dev testing library user event. Great library, very useful for testing. I don't think that requires any setup, so we'll just try. So user event setup, and then we're going to say we're going to need an async function here. Async user.type. We're going to type. Why don't we start out with the value of null? I think that'll be easy because then it's empty. And we're going to type 10/31/2023 into screen find by. It would be nice if we could find by label text. And so let's just say const label. Wait a second. Oh, the label doesn't come from the field because of different places in the UI that I use this. So my field. So I'd like to be able to say find by label text label. We'll see if that works, or maybe we need a tweak to the code to make it more accessible. This is an await. So after we type in that field, we are hoping that expect onChange to have been called with 2023 10/31. And onChange needs to exist. So onChange equals onChange, and onChange equals just function. So it is a just mock function that's going to be called, and we're going to make sure it's called with the right translated format of the date. So let's save it and see. Date editor. Looks like you passed a promise object instead of a DOM node. All right. What did I do? Oh yeah, fine. I used find by incorrectly. We can use get by because that should be present right away. Find by is for asynchronously waiting for something. I'm able to find a label with the text of my field. So maybe the way that the labels are set up with MUI doesn't work like that. So let's take a look at the source here. Input placeholder. So looking into the accessibility could be good to do later. Oh, button area label choose date. Yeah, so I may need to look into the accessibility of this more. I mean, this is helpful that this is being set up. For the sake of adding the test, let me I'm gonna add a to do for myself there. To do, see if accessible labels are not being set up by MUI. For now, I think if we just say get by role text box, it should be the only text box. So this should at least get the test passing, or at least that step working. Let's see. Set value is not a function. Did I take that out? Oh, set value. Yeah, no, sorry. OnChange is the name of the internal prop. Set value is the name of the prop that I pass into date editor component. Now that I'm using this at a unit test level, that might be nicer if I wasn't assuming that a setter was going to be passed. It's like, oh, I'm just onChange value. But I'll use the same name for now, and maybe that'll be changed later. In fact, maybe I'll give myself a to-do there. Consider renaming to onChange or something. Possible refactorings, but I want to get this covered by test before I do any refactorings. So we call this set value. Yes, TypeScript would have told me that I was getting that wrong. I'm using TypeScript finally professionally on my current project, and I'm kind of liking it. So maybe I'll go to it someday, but I'd just rather not add that dependency right now. And the test passes. So as always, don't trust it. Let's make sure it breaks if we break it. So what we're saying is when we change the text in here, set value should be called with the translated value. So let's make sure the test fails if we remove the onChange entirely. It's good when you make a change like this to think about what you expect to happen. This is something I learned from my former coworker, Jay Hayes, who's really great tester. This helps you so that if it fails for a reason other than you expect, you can think through why that is. So I expect this will say that set value was not called because it's not used at all. Let's confirm that. Expected the function to have been called with that, and it was not. I notice here, I expect set value to have been called. I don't always do this on professional projects, but I do like, for the sake of readability, to say mock name set value. It just makes it easier at a glance. Expected set value to have been called, but it was not. That makes it a little more readable. Cool, so we've confirmed that that does actually fail if it's not called at all. Let's now try a trivial version of it where we say onChange set value. I expect this will fail because it's passing a day.js object along instead of a string translated version. Yep, so expected to be called with 2023, 10, 31, but actually, oh, there's a number of different arguments there. Yeah, it looks like there's multiple calls as we kind of go through there as we're gradually typing it. That could be an interesting to do to think about as well. So let me write that. To do, investigate multiple calls to set value, see if that causes, while typing, issues. Yeah, so the realism of user type is actually showing gradual keyboard input, and some of those values along the way are not valid values. So there might be an edge case there that I'm not handling. I'll look into that. We'll see. Maybe I'll feel like doing that on the stream, or maybe I'll do it another time, but I'm going to capture it as a to-do. It's getting a pretty cluttered file here. This is showing all the edge cases that I didn't know that I would find, but I was hoping to find cases like this in component tests. It's the value of one of the values of component tests. But for now, let's stay on the course, stay focused on, we want to get this passing and making sure that it's covering the functionality as we have it currently. So what was the state of it again? Yep. So this ensures that just directly calling set value is not good. Instead, we'll do this. And we are calling dateutils.object-to-server-string. This is an object. This is a method to server string, object to server string. So I actually have what I think is pretty thorough test coverage for that function already. So I don't need to thoroughly cover that here. In fact, I can't even pass in all possible values because I can't control what date picker does. But I'm just confirming that I'm using that lower level function to correctly pass along the string. So now that I put in the real implementation of onChange, it works. Now I think what I want to test here is, what about thinking about that other edge case that I handled already, the edge case of when it's cleared out. So let's just see how that works and see if that's actually being covered. So let's say it calls set value with null upon clearing the field. I see I'm going to need to use user in a couple places, so let me set that up. I'm just going to say let user for each. It is best, according to the docs, if you initialize a new user each test. That's why user event.setup was added. So we'll just get a fresh user there. Let me make sure the other tests will pass, that I haven't broken it by making that change. They do. All right, so now we've got this here. So let's say we are going to need that mock. We're going to start with date string Halloween. Thanksgiving in just a couple days, so Halloween is on my mind as the last major holiday. So when we start out with a date string, and then we want to do user.clear, I'm pretty sure from using this in my client project that that's the right word to use. So if we clear out the contents of the text box, I expect set value to have been called with null. And we'll see. Maybe it's undefined, maybe it's a bug, but I want to find out the functionality, and so we'll get it covered. And it says that that's right. That passed pretty easily, and there's not really obvious conditions to do here, but so in this case, to confirm what's happening, I think I'm going to log out the day.js object and the string just so I can see the inputs and the outputs to see if they're what I expect. So for this test, by narrowing it down to one test, we just see that running. Null is coming in and null is coming out. And in fact, I think that I could test the date utils, check the date utils unit test to see that. It returns null for null. Cool, I guess I set that up that way to handle this case, so that's nice. But it's nice the date editor component to confirm that that's wired up correctly. So that feels like an appropriate test to add. Save, and let's see if the whole thing is running. Oh, we got our console log still, so that can probably go away. Cool, they all pass. All right, so we have pretty thorough coverage, I think, of these two functionality-based props here. And so now I have a number of to-dos that I came through here. Oh, is the label not being used? Oh yeah, the label's not being used because I didn't find that that was used. So I think I am going to make a commit here just to save this work. And we'll say, oh yeah, let's do the setup. We'll add this, setup RTL, and then test date editor component. After this, I'm going to need to step away for just a second for a quick break, so I'll be back in just a moment. See you in a minute. All right, I'm back. So let's see what's next. We have our test coverage for date editor component, and now we have these to-dos that came up while adding this test coverage. And I didn't plan this out in advance to know that those to-dos were coming. That's just what came up as we worked on this together. So now I have a few different options. I didn't want to stop adding the test coverage as I went because that felt like a distraction to change the functionality and could risk breaking it before it was thoroughly covered by test. But now I have these several to-dos here. So one option is I could just stay focused on the goal of adding test coverage to the whole suite, because otherwise it could really slow down and maybe I don't ever get there. Or I can stop and address all these to-dos, no matter how long it takes. Or an option in between could be, well, let me just take a first pass. Let me see if I can find any quick fixes for these to-dos. And if any of them are bigger, I can leave them in there for longer. That's kind of the point that I want to go to. You can think of it as a time box. I'm time boxing a limited amount of time put into trying to fix these to-dos. And that'll prevent the list of to-dos from getting too overwhelming. Plus, it's helpful for the stream to show you all some of the benefit that can come from adding this kind of test coverage. So the first one is not a to-do to get the test working. It's a suggested refactor to the component. And that will require changing the calling code as well. And so I think I'm going to leave that to do for now. The next one, see if accessible labels are not being set up by MUI. Let me put the code. It might have been nice for me to keep that commented code in there. What is this? Open in terminal. I guess I command clicked on something. So what we'd like to be able to do, I mean, I guess even get by role would cover that, but yeah, let me keep the query as get by role because that'll give us nice test feedback. Name my field. We're going to call this again, const label equals my field. I'm going to set up that label. And so I think this is what we were seeing was failing before, although with my changes to it, maybe it'll work fine. And I'm going to do a dot only just to keep the test run nice and focused and the test output. Oh, that does work. Okay. Well, so yeah, so get by label text may have not been the right thing. Let me make sure it breaks correctly. If I look for my fielda, it should fail. Unable to find an accessible element with the role text box and name my fielda. And then here are the accessible roles. So this is a nice thing about using find by role is that you get this nice output here. Text box name my field. And let's see how it's getting that. Class ID. It's probably the ID. Let's take a look there. His ID is R0. Yeah, label for R0. So that is a label that MUI is wiring up. That's great. Cool. So that was actually nice and quick to get working, and yet it's still, by putting in a to-do, it didn't take us off of our focus. I do kind of want to look into what was not working for me before to see why. I think it was, I mean, I'm pretty sure we were doing get by label text. Oh, yeah, let me get this working again before I comment it out. My field should fail. Yes, just for I forget, name is label. That passes. Okay, so that's working. But I think before I was doing get by label text label, and that was failing. No, it is succeeding. Okay, I might have, I'm not sure. You all have access to the video, which I'll see later, and so something may have been going wrong there. There can be some performance implications for get by role. So on my client apps, the last couple ones that I've done since starting at Test Double, we've moved away from get by role. But these are very small isolated tests here. And so I think I am going to stick with get by role because it's nice for documentation purposes. And by using this get by role, we're confirming that the app is actually accessible. And so that's good because I want to support accessibility for the broadest range of users. I think that's a very important thing for us to do as web developers. Great, well, that was a pretty easy to do. Now let's think about this one here. Do I want to commit that change first? I probably do, yeah. And I don't think we need a separate commit for this, so I can just say add this, add this. Oh, I do want to get rid of the dot only though. Remove that, make sure it all runs. Just a git shortcut for me to put that in there. Okay, let's go back to dot only on here. Now let's look at this last to do. Investigate multiple calls to set value while typing, see if that causes issues. So this relates to when I had, when I had this wrong and it was erroring out, it was actually showing multiple calls. But let me try something else here to show it to you. to have been called times 1. So if you want to make sure something's called only once, you can do to have been called times. And I should have called this in advance. I expected 1 call, but it was called 3 times. So that was called 3 times, I think actually, pretty sure, because of the typing here. So what is the best way to get the output? I don't know, but I know what we had before, called with foo. So let's just have a wrong call, and then it'll list out all the calls that were actually made. All right, so first it was called with invalid date, then 0202 1031, and then 2023 1031. So I'm not really sure what's happening in the invalid date scenario there. That does seem like that could be causing a problem in the running app, or at least not ideal, like not ideal calls. Let's log out inside onChange what's happening here. Okay, we get a day.js object that's already invalid date there, and then undefined 0202. Yeah, I think this is from like gradually typing this in, but I'm just not sure in what scenarios it's being called. Because it's year 202. I guess it's 2023. I don't know why it doesn't call it beforehand. So let's actually try in the running app and see the sequence here. Now that we have this log statement, let's go into the running app. We got our console here. It's going to be, yeah, make that a little bigger. And let's start typing in here. Invalid date 23. Oop. Sorry, 10/31 2023. So interestingly, like once we type in the first character, it calls it once with invalid date, and then it doesn't call it again as we type more characters. I have a theory that that might be because day.js considers all invalid dates equal, maybe, and so once it's got one, as our typing continues to provide more invalid dates, it's not causing an issue. So yeah, so this is interesting. Does the typing of invalid date cause an issue for my app? I wonder what it'll save to the server. So let's check this out all in integration together. I'm going to clear out this field. That's not clear enough. Let me click out and back into it. Yeah, maybe I'm sending garbage to the server here. I'm not really sure. So this, the unit test is going to give us some help here. So what if I type in 1? There's a patch request sent to the server because I save upon change more or less in this application. Request, field values invalid date. So this has actually caused a bug in my application. I don't want to send invalid date back to the server in this case. That's saving garbage data to the server. I'd rather just have it not make the change at all. So this is really great. I can handle this differently to remove this bug in my application. So what would I like to happen in the application overall? Overall, I would not like this request to be sent to the server until there's a real valid date value coming back. So now let's take a look in the application at the component and see what we could do at the component level. Can we handle that at the component level? Well, we could have code elsewhere in the app see an invalid date coming out of it and doing something with it, or I guess in this case it turns into a string, so you could look for the string invalid date. But I think we can do better. I think date editor handles that input. I think the rest of the app just doesn't want to know when an invalid date is coming out. So let's make a test for that. And then we'll see maybe the sequence that happens here, and maybe it's still good or maybe it's not. So we'll stay away from this. And we'll say it does not call set value when an invalid date is entered. All right, so let's give this a try. Leave these to-dos, or that to-do out. Set value. So let's type in 1 first, and let's say, yeah, so let's say simulates a partially entered date, just when you've entered the first character. So now we want to say expect set value not to have been called. And so here we're actually doing test-driven development for this step, in the sense of We want this new functionality to be handled a certain way, and I'm writing the test first that should fail before I implement it. So let's save it with a .only. Let's see it fail, and then we'll implement it. Expected 0 calls, but we received 1 call with invalid date. So this is the red part of the red-green refactor cycle of test-driven development. We've written the code, the test, we've specified the functionality that we want. Now our test has failed because we haven't implemented it yet. Now we're going to implement what we've specified there. So let's do it. So I think what we want here is basically just to check if the day.js object is invalid. And we've got like outputted stuff, but let's see in the API of day.js how we're supposed to check for that. Valid returns a boolean indicating whether the day.js's date is valid. And let's just check that in the console if we can here. Day.js, thankfully that exists. 1 invalid date, and we say is valid, false. Versus if we say 2023 10/31. It's pretty cool about a browser actually. They have it set up so you can just get into the console of your JavaScript and make it work. Maybe there's some upsides to JavaScript after all. That's true. So great. So the isValid method seems like what we can use to check for validity here. And so I think all what we're saying here is if day.js object is valid, do these things and don't do them if it's not valid. We'll keep the log in there for now, just so we can see it. But I expect that when we save this, that our test is going to pass. It does. And now, because we've seen it, we don't need to go back and re-break it again because we've seen it fail first in the red step. Now that we're in the green step, we're good to go. I'm going to run the whole suite to make sure we haven't broken something else. We have. Cannot read properties of null. Reading is valid. Okay, yeah, so sometimes the date might be null there. So I made a mistake. And we can handle that by just doing a safe navigation operator. I don't think that's what it's called in JavaScript. Nullish, not nullish coalescing. Man, I don't know what that's called. Question mark dot. I think that'll handle it. Call set value with a string formatted value on change. Okay, so here's our failure. So let's revert that back. This is how we were trying to visualize what was going on there. I've changed a lot of things at once here, so I'm getting back to the state where we understand what's happening and have taken a small step. I'm going to comment out the logging for now as well, just so we can see what's happening. Call set value with null upon clearing the field. It does not. Oh, look, so I've failed that case. So I think what we really want here is, I mean, if it's null, we could just return it. But we could also say if not day.js object or day.js object is valid. So basically, yeah, that's a little hard to, maybe we can refactor that to make it clearer, but I think we only want to call through here, we only want to skip this if there is a day.js object and it's not valid, which maybe we could write that differently, but let's save and try it. Cool, now all of our cases are passing. If I'd planned out showing a way to break some tests from when you're making other ones work, couldn't have gone better than that, but that was not planned. I just am bad developer, which is fine. When you have a good test coverage, you don't need to be good developer. I mean, it's good to be a good developer. Anyways, whatever. So, yeah, with this check in here now, we've now specified that we're not calling set value when an invalid date is entered. So that is progress, and I want to make a commit for that progress. I'm going to do a separate commit for that. Git add patch is nice to review the changes, to add just individual changes in a focused way. Here's our functionality change. I don't want this comment here, so I'm going to split and skip that, but I am going to add this new test. I don't need that to do there either, because that to do exists in the other test. So let's just remove that. Add that. And then let's call this do not call set value for invalid date. And so let's actually take a look in the application now to see if that change that I made shows up and we're getting the change to the full application behavior that I expected. Reload the app, open this up. Now remember, we started to see a call to the server sending invalid date to the server as I type. So let's see if that's changed now. 1, no change. 10/31/2023. That's saved. Now notice we do have the year 202 is being sent to the server because that is a valid date. That's kind of weird. Now, that's kind of an implication of my saving to the server as you type here. But I don't think that's a problem. Like saving a valid date that you've typed in, like type the correct date afterwards to save afterwards. So I'm actually fine with that. So thinking back, so first of all, like we see that our change has done what we expected in the overall application. And then also, when we saw that thing here, remember when I had an invalid value and we run this test, and I'm going to do only on that test, it says it's been called twice. So now we understand it. Like before, I was kind of surprised that it was called 3 different times and one of them was a problem. We've taken care of the one that's a problem. And now that we see, oh yeah, it's going to be called twice, like as you go through, as you're typing this in. And so that's expected. That's totally fine. So I think I'm going to leave like that. That works out great. So our unit tests here have given us greater insight into what's happening into our component. And you're feeling, and now some of that functionality I wanted to change and some of it I did not. So now we have this greater insight, something that did not come up. It might have come up in a little bit ways while running Cypress, I'm not sure. But we've gotten this greater insight here. So that's great. And now we can remove that to do. I'm just going to put that as a part of the previous change. So 1 hour in, we have good test coverage of date editor component. I feel like that's good progress. Let's see what's next. Date time editor component is going to be extremely similar to the previous one. And so I don't think I'll have too much trouble getting that in place. That's interesting that I did a default export there. I wonder why. Oh, I think that has something to do with my deferred lazy loading done with Webpack. Yeah, so I don't think I want to test datetime editor component on the stream because it'll be very similar to what we have before. Let's go on to something more interesting, and I'll come back to that in my own personal time. We have the choice field is next. Let's see how that works. So first of all, we have the choice field data type. That's just an object here with specifying some things. Because the Riverbed application dynamically looks up and lets you dynamically configure models like this, this stuff is all pulled up interactively as we go, just as the users use the application. So I need to be able to have the label to show on the screen. Format value and get sort value. So format value, I believe, and maybe it could use a better name, shows when you're outputting the value just as a string, how do you want to show it? Get sort value gives you the value that you're going to sort by, which is different for strings and for numbers and for dates and things like that. There's also editor component that goes to the component that you actually use. And in the case of date, it's the date editor component, but we have a lazy loading thing happening there. But yeah, the date editor component is what's used. Oh, I see there's a few other properties as well. Is temporal, is valid value. I forget what I used as valid value before. Generally, there's not validations in the UI, so I'm not totally sure. But when we get to that, we'll investigate it. Let's think about for the choice here. What functionality do we have here? Oh, I should look down at the choice editor component as well. Here I do it in line because it's not something large that I wanted to split out of the bundle. For a choice editor, which is a choice like this, choosing from the list, it uses the MUI drop-down field. And we configure a bunch of things, but there's a little bit of looking up and passing back the ID and things like that. Incidentally, this is one where that's not using a browser select component, but MUI actually has a pretty nice browser select component. So I think that could be nice to put in. I'm going to add myself a to-do for that. To-do, try using browser MUI's component for browser native select. That'll just be nicer in terms of semantic HTML, probably in terms of accessibility as well. So that'll be a nice improvement. We'll see if we get to that on the stream, depending on how I'm feeling. So what functionality is there in this file? This is kind of an interesting file in that it both has a component and these config values as well. That's kind of interesting. And I am exporting that, right? Choice field data type. Yeah. So what do I want to test here? For this object, I don't want to test the key. That's just a hard-coded value. I don't want to test the label. That's just a hard-coded value. But format value and get sort value are functions with functionality. And so I want to test those. So let's get some tests in place for that and see how it goes. Choice spec.js. That is vanilla JavaScript though. And I said that I wanted to focus on React testing library. So yeah, I think in the test file, I'm just going to put a to-do for those. Describe choice field type. Let's store the whole file. And then we'll say it to do format value. So jest has .to do to tell you that there's to-dos for there, and that actually gives you test output on that. So let's see that test output. This is for change the file choice. Yeah, so there's 2 to-dos there, and that's been really helpful on my current client project as we had getting that nice test output to remind you to go back to something. And now what we want to do is describe editor component. That's what we expose. So what do we want to test for the editor component, the choice editor component? We are getting the options being shown. So the value, so let's take a look here. So there's a label, empty label, not important. The value used, which is like the internally stored value, is this. It's saying, and I forget if this is required. I always forget how different UI libraries do dropdowns. But apparently what I'm doing here is I return the actual choice object as the current value. And then on value change, I pass the ID back. So what's coming in, so the value passed into here is the ID, and the ID is what's sent back out. This is again because in my sort of flexible user-defined data model, it's the string ID that's saved on the server side. And that way, if you change the label of a dropdown, all your records are updated automatically. So as before, we've got a string coming in and a string going out. So that's going to be an important thing. And we're also going to want to make sure, I think, that the options show up in the right way. So I think even though it's pretty trivial, these come together to make sure that the options display correctly. So I think that's a function of this as well. Disabled style test ID, not very important. These test IDs, incidentally, are used for Cypress that does recommend using test IDs. In React Testing Library, for various reasons, they recommend using accessibility properties instead, and we're going to go with that. So it's really about the values coming in and the options that are there and the values coming back out. So let's write some tests for those, maybe some to-do tests here. We can say it to do renders the options choices as options. Choice was the term. Drop down options. Choice is just the term that I chose for the data model thing. It pre-selects the option corresponding to the value. We'll say calls set value with the ID of the choice chosen by the user. That makes sense, right? And we also want call set value with null if the user chooses the empty option. So the way this is coded, there's always an empty option. That's just sort of a decision based on the dynamic data model of this thing. I haven't yet had a need to make ones that don't have an empty option, and so having every field emptyable is simple. And so we can say here, renders the choices as dropdown options with an empty option. So we'll test for that as well. All right, so let's just kind of, I think that fully covers it. So let's just do one of those at a time. First of all, oh yeah, we'll say dot only, and we'll say render. How do we get this? So we get the choice field data type editor component. What's going to be the best way to do that? We're going to put that in here. Const editor component equals choice field data type. We import that from there. That's the default export, right? All right, so we get the editor component. And what are the names of the props for this? We have field. I see that field is going to blow up if we don't have that. So let's get that set up as well. We'll just copy from here the sample field. we'll go ahead and let's not confuse things too much. Field and label could be useful. Field equals field, label equals label. What else do we need here? We need the value and the field. The field has attributes, that has options, that has choices. And there's really good reasons for all that nesting. If you believe me, thank you for believing me. But let's go ahead and fill those in. And if I get it wrong, we'll be told. Attributes, options, choices. And let's just define choices separately. Let's take a look here at what choices entail. So a choice has an ID, and a choice has a label. That's nice and straightforward. So we'll say ID. The field has an ID 1, 2, 3. We'll call this 2, 3, 4. Label equals apple. And then 3, 4, 5. Label banana. And then 4, 5, 6 will be a cherry. Those will be our options. What's going on here? Oh, getting a syntax error just from having incomplete syntax here. What have I done? What have I done? Oh, I ran across this recently with bad error outputs. So this is not JSX. So because even though choice is JS, that's right. On my client projects, we use the JSX extension for everything that has JSX, but here we do not. So that might not be what's going wrong. Yeah, that wouldn't be because I have JSX in here. All right, let's slow down and find out what's happening here. Label, unexpected token. Const label equals my field. Maybe I'm not closing something correctly. Let's get the choices set. Yeah, let's solve the syntax error before anything else. Oh, attributes, options, choices. Let me comment all this out and see what's happening. Oh, maybe it's this closing parentheses. Oh yeah, that's all it was. All right, well, that was simple. Thanks for nothing, syntax output. Okay, we got, so the field, the choices are passed in the field, and then we do want the value. Which can just be null for now, unless we find otherwise. So we're going to say, so now we want to make sure all the correct options show up. And I forget how this is rendered out. So let's do the most intuitive thing using get by role, and then we'll see if we need to like click on something or something like that. I think there's also something else though, in that, let's look at the running application. We want the chosen value to render in that field. So let me make another to-do for that. It to-do pre-selects the, oh, don't think ahead too much, Josh, you already did it. All right, we're gonna focus on the options here. So we're gonna say expect. You know, now that I'm looking at this, I do think that it's actually going to be more straightforward to test the one that pre-selects the option here. So let's do that one first. Only. And let's put that up ahead. We'll skip this one for now. And then here we're going to say expect screen get by text. I'll just try get by text and see what happens. Get by text, because I don't know what kind of user interface elements are actually being used by MUI for that, and that might change if we change it to a real. If we change it to a real browser select, that's going to help because we're going to have more predictability here. So get by text. I guess we do want a value here. We also want it to do pre-selects shows the empty placeholder if the value is null. So we're going to come back to that. So we do need a value here. The value is, I'll just hard code this for now. Value is 234. Let's do 345 to make sure it's not using the first one. Banana to be visible. So I don't know if that's the right selector. That's some of the experimentation with React testing library is what is actually going to give me the assertion that the real thing I need is happening. But this is what I'm trying to do. Given that we have these choices, when we pass in the value that's one of them, we want it to be pre-selected. So let's see if this passes or not. I don't know. So this has said that it's failed. Unable to find element with the text banana. So let's see with our output. Because we're testing these very small focus components, our JSX output is actually not very big, and so that works out nicely. We do have a label for my field. Interesting, and it has a div with choose. So I wouldn't expect that. I would expect it to show banana there. So I think that I've probably wired something else up wrong. So let's log it out and see. In the choice here, console log choices. Choices are undefined, so I have wired something up wrong. Field, attributes, options, choices. Field, attributes, options. Oh, no, it's not choices. That's nested under an object with choices, which is basically like that. So it passes and the choices are outputted there. So that's good. But actually from that error output, I got an idea of what we could assert on that's a bit more accessible. Let's leave this and let's say expect, I don't know why autocomplete's not working here. Screen get by role. I don't know what that role was. Actually, so let's go back to this. Let's say this is good. Let's say foo. Actually, you know what? Instead of hacking like that, let me just do the real thing. Screen.debug will output what you have. And so I think it's just short enough that that'll work. Yeah, so we have my field. So this is an element. This is a, what is it called? Aria role combo box. Okay, great. So we're going to say expect screen get by role combo box name label to have value, I think, maybe banana. Can't believe I just made a Minions reference. So this is logging output and then it errors. Expected to have value banana, but it received undefined. So yeah, experimenting with this is kind of complex, and I wish there was better error output from RTL. Role combo box. So what was it? It was text. So it contained text. And so let's just take a look through the testing library. Or maybe it's just DOM. Let's see if just DOM has something helpful there. To have text content. Let's try that. To have text content. This may not be the best way to assert on it, but if it works and it passes, that's something. It passes. All right, so let's take out this debugging. Let's take these out as well. Make sure it still passes. And now let's break it to make sure if that doesn't work. We'll say take out value, and now does it fail? Yes, it does. So if we're not setting the value, it just uses choose, that default option. Great, so we've got this option covered. So it pre-selects the option corresponding to the value. And also we have, it shows the empty placeholder if the value is null. So let's get that in there. We're going to say if the value is null, expect the combo box with name label to have text content. And now we need to provide this. Oh, no, we don't. It's hard-coded in here. Empty label equals choose. So if the value is null, what should show is choose. And let's see if that's true. It is. Now let's just break it to make sure. Choose. Yep. So if the value shown is not what we expected it to be, the test will fail. So that confirms the test is working. Great. All right. Now we have it renders the choices as drop-down options with an empty option. So we want to make sure all of them appear there. I think there's a role named option. I'm sure there's a better ARIA way to look this up to see. But also we'll get some helpful output from React testing library That's one of the great things about get by role. It's been a great way for me to learn about ARIA roles because it gives good output. Here is the things with ARIA roles in your JSX is what RTL gives to me. And so I want to say get by role, all by role option, because I expect multiple options. And let's just say to equal hi. That won't work, but I just want to see what we get by the role option, if anything. Unable to find accessible element with the role option. There's a combo box and nothing else. So I think we need to click on it. And that might be different once we change over to use a browser select, which we might or might not do on the stream. But I think I need to click on it. So let's get that set up. Let's just copy over our boilerplate. That's one of the downsides of JavaScript is we got some boilerplate going on. But we're going to set up our user. We're going to import user event. And we're going to say await user click on the combo box. And we could just say name label just to make 100% sure. So when we click on it, then the options will show, and we'll see again now if we get any output from this. Yes, we have several of them, and it's elements, and so I guess we could use just DOM matchers on those. In fact, probably to contain text. Now, there might be a more efficient way to do this, but let's just do one at a time. Let's say expect options 0 to contain text choose, because I think the first one will say choose. This is also defining that the empty option should show at the start. To have text content, that's what that is. And that passes. Let's check the number of options as well. Expect options length to equal 4, because there should be the empty option and then those 3 options there. Save and make sure that works. Let's make sure this test fails if we change this. Yes. So the render, this test we have, this assertion will fail if the text is not as expected, so that's good. And then I think we just want to say apple, banana, cherry. The test passes, and between checking the length and the text content of each, we should be good. And let's just say if one of them is off. Oh, so that's interesting. I changed the label of one of them, but the test still passed, so that's concerning. Is it doing a substring matching? It is doing substring matching, which I think is fine. I don't think we need to get more precise than that. Maybe we add some prefix or suffix in the future. We're asserting that an option shows up that does contain that text. So that to me covers this functionality. And again, not again, but let's see here. So if we just remove the options, the test will fail. If we remove the label extractor to show the label on there, the test succeeds. Oh, well, that's worrying. I wonder if it does that automatically using the label field. Let's look that up to see, because I don't want to assume this could actually be a way to simplify the code. We're going to go to MUI.com. I may have put in some unnecessary logic in there. What in the world is the name of this again? Drop down field. Is that mine? No, that's mine. It's a weird abstraction I made. I forgot about that. This is maybe not necessary in the future. So it is a, oh yeah, so I wired up some other stuff here. I've forgotten what I've done, and so when I get down to these, testing these components, we'll test at this level as well. But it is a MUI select. Basic select. 10, 20, 30. Okay, so this is actually using menu items. So I'm being reminded of what's underneath the hood. Label extractor. Yeah, and the default label extractor is pulling out the label property. So I've set this up we'll be testing this at this level as well. But so yeah, so actually the label extractor is not needed. We've been able to simplify the code here. So that works out nicely. And I'm comfortable doing that at this point because we've got test coverage confirming it. Sweet. Now, what about the ID, the key extractor? Should we be digging into the props of the component? I don't even know if MUI stores it there. The reason we need the key extractor is so that, well, actually, I don't know. I don't know what that's needed for. That might be something internal to MUI. So maybe if there's time, we can mess around with that and see if it breaks without that. Maybe that's used here. Key extractor. Yeah, that's something down in drop-down field I'll need to play around with when we test that out. But what we want to do, on value change is the other thing we wanted to test, but let's see if that's the next test. Yeah, call set value ID. Let's just save and make sure all the other tests are still passing. They are. Only calls set value with the ID of the choice chosen by the user. So let's just write the test and see. One of the things about focusing on the behavior and the specification is that we're not thinking about what's happening in the details. We're not thinking about, does a certain internal line of code get executed? What we're thinking about is, what's the behavior needed from the rest of the app? And so when we write this using React Testing Library's approach of write the test that uses the app in the way that the user uses it, that's very helpful in that regard. So let's just say we have a component and it doesn't initially have a value. That's great. The user clicks on it, and then the user clicks on get by role option name. I guess that could be another way we could look at the options as well as by name. So maybe we'll come back to that. Say to do look up with get by role name instead to do. So we'll look up option banana just to do the second one, and then we'll say expect const set value equals just function mock name set value to get some nice test output. Set value to have been called with banana. What's banana's ID? Because we are looking up the choices ID, which is 345. And the reason, just for a bit of context, I got async here. The reason I'm using awaits in front of the user.clicks is that that's the documented API of the user event library. I might even get a lint warning if I don't do that. I do not, but I know that that is what's required. And one of the things I love about user event is that it's giving you the realism of asynchrony. That's how we got the multiple executions of the date function being called that caught that bug for us. That wouldn't have happened if we used the lower level fire event library. Yeah, so we use asynchrony there, but otherwise I don't sprinkle awaits around everywhere, and we just put them in where necessary for asynchronous behavior to happen. But as soon as the user clicks on this, synchronously, set value should be called. But we'll find out if that's the case or not. Let's save, and let's see. This might pass right away, but I wouldn't be surprised if I've gotten something wrong. And even when we do get it passing, I want to break the functionality to make sure the test catches that. But let's see if it passes. Set value is not a function. I forgot to pass it in. It is used because I use it down there. I just need to pass it in here. It passes. So let's try breaking this. First of all, we're just going to remove onValueChange entirely. OnValueChange is not a function, so we get an error. It's coming from, I think, the lower level. I think that's in drop-down field here. We're calling onValueChange there. Okay, well, what if we just have nothing in there? Set value, we expected set value to be called with 345, but it was not called at all. All right, well, what if we just put it in? I'm kind of doing test-driven development in reverse, which is weird, where I'm adding back in just enough functionality to get past the current failure. Now set value is called, but it's called with 0 arguments. So what if we just pass the choice itself naively? I want to make sure the test fails, because it's important that we're getting the right output from here. I'm going to avoid my usual rant about testing implementation details. Yet the test will fail because here, instead of getting the ID out, we're getting the full object, which could be fine. That could have been the way we defined the API, but we defined the API, or I defined the API in the past of the choice editor component to give me the ID coming out of there. So I'll put that back in. The question mark is there for the case where the empty option is chosen, so we'll make sure that works in another test coming up. But now that we've put the functionality back, the test passes, and so I think we're really covering that. Let's go on to our next test here. It calls set value with null if the user chooses the empty option. Let's copy this test because it's going to be pretty similar. But just for the sake of full realism, I am going to start with a value of 456 just to have some value in there. We're going to choose. And when we choose, we should get set value should be called with null. I forget if this is the case or not, but this is what I understand the code to be doing. It fails. I thought it seemed like there was something I was missing. I think I'm missing, yeah, a close on there. It's called with undefined, and maybe that was what was intentional. Yeah, I think that's what happens by default with this optional chaining. Optional chaining. I think that's the name of what that's called. So we're getting undefined back. So let's say to do, maybe this should be null for simplicity. But let's just document, calls it with undefined. That passes. All right, let's just see. I think this will blow up if we don't have the optional chaining, but let's just confirm that that is necessary in the code. We save, it blows up. So we put it back in, we're good. So we define that this is called with undefined. Now I want to think about this and look at the code and see how this works. Depending on how other code works on my app, this might be causing a bug and it may not be saving correctly to the server. So let's see if it does or doesn't work in the context of the larger application. So I have this component here, or sorry, I have this card here, this data item with morning in the drop down here. So let's see what happens when I choose the empty option, choose. It's saved to the server. Attributes field values, that's there. So I think that field is just not listed because when I do add a value, and that's patched in, yeah, this fake UUID, that's what I use for my testing purposes here. Yeah, and my seeded data. And so when I remove that, it just removes it from the list. So depending on your server, that might or might not be correct. So what we can do here is actually just reload the app and make sure that that field comes back empty from here. Let me start it out with morning there. We'll reload it and make sure we do have morning showing up. Now when I clear it out, reload, it is in fact empty. And when we pull up that record, is it this card? Yeah. Attributes, field values, yes. So the undefined means we're just not passing it back to the server at all. And the way the field values are stored in the server, which I happen to know is a JSON blob that's just sort of stored there. The fact that it's absent does actually correctly get set to the server. And so that is good, that worked. Now I could change it to null. Maybe that's useful. The fact that undefined and null exist in JavaScript is in many ways another problem, but I think this is good enough for now. That does not feel urgent to fix. Let me remove this dot only and take a look at the full code, and that's passing. So all those tests for editor component are passing. I saw something else that jumped out at me. As far as here, value, choices. If there are choices, find these, otherwise not. This makes me think about what happens when choices are empty. So that could actually be, maybe that's several tests, but let's try it. And we'll just say it, question when there are no choices. Well, that's interesting. Shouldn't choices be a required option? I think it may be optional, but because the way my flexible server-side data model might work, that might just be empty. That just might be null or empty, or null or undefined. So it's not really when choices is the empty array that I care about. When choices is missing. And I think a null or an undefined should behave the same way. So what would we expect to happen when choices is missing? We could run it in the real app, but I think the point is that value just doesn't blow up. And I think choose would be the only option. The default option would be the only option. So yeah, let's test for that. Only shows the default option when choices is missing. So let's move that up here, this sequence in here. Pre-selects option according to value, shows the place of the value is null, run to the choices, drop in options with an empty option. So let's test both parts of that. So we'll say this will be a field with no choices. And we'll set that up here. We'll copy and paste the field. Maybe the value of it. Choices is null. To do, think about if we need to test undefined as well instead. I think we probably don't, but I'm just going to record that to do that. I'm not fully confident on that right now. The value will also be null in this case, so I think that's fine. And so I think what we want to confirm here is there should be a combo box with that label. It should have choose, and then we click on it. Options length should equal 1. And option should equal choose. So this is a lot of things at once, so we'll break each bit of functionality afterwards to see if it's working. Let's say only. There's no options is not defined. I think I got that here. That all passes. So let's just see what happens. I'm trying to confirm what happens here. So if I just assume that there is choices there, the code blows up because it can't read properties of null, reading find. All right. Yeah. And I can't think of individual things to break that would change this. Basically, it's confirming that the combo box is there. I guess just to make sure this number is correct and fails if it's wrong. If we expect 2 options, it says there's just 1. And if we expect it to have nonsense text content, it does fail. So this is just covering that scenario. That's another possible scenario that could come up here that could happen. All right. We've got pretty good test coverage here, but there is a to-do we want to come back to. I'm going to take one more break, and then we'll come back and do that cleanup, and maybe we'll wrap up the stream for today. So I'll be right back. All right, here we are. All right, let's look over this test and think about the to-dos. Well, these to-dos are coming back to off the stream, but for the editor component, had the to-do here about whether I want to look up the options by get by role with name instead. So what I'm thinking here, and let's just try to see. We'll just run that one test. It passes. What I'm thinking is if we said expect screen get by role option name choose to be visible. Let's see if that works. It does, and if I get the name wrong, it'll say that is not found. We have options name choose, apple, banana, and cherry. So that does catch it. One thing I like a little bit less about that, though, is that that doesn't confirm the sequence. And so since I have the list of options just to get the count anyways, I kind of like the fact that we're kind of confirming the order here. So that's pretty nice. So I don't think I need the extra assurance of checking the accessibility name in this case. I think this works out a bit better. So I think I'm going to leave the test like that. I could always change the test in the future if I found extra assurance was needed. The testing of undefined, I don't feel like that's interesting to think through on the stream. I don't think that's very important. I think there was another to do. Maybe this should be null for simplicity. Yeah, but I think what I wanted to do is, when I mentioned before about changing this component to use a browser native select instead. You can see this is not what a browser select looks like. And on my client project, we actually went from using MUI selects to using browser native selects for the extra realism of them. So let's try that. It is interesting because there's a lower level component of mine that we're using here as far as the drop-down field. So eventually we'll have the test for that. So we'll see. If I get into trouble by changing this at a higher level, like maybe I'll revert it. But I just wanted to give it a try on the stream and see if that works well. I think we may need to change some of our test assertions here. It's not ideal to have to do that when you to change the test and change the implementation code at the same time. And for vanilla JS, I wouldn't recommend that. But when you're using React testing library and React components, sometimes the details of what's implemented in terms of accessibility and DOM and things like that can change. So I think it can be workable. But let's commit what we have first before we use that. Before we use it or lose it, and then we'll see where we go from there. Oh yeah, we have a to do. Yeah, I think I'm going to commit those in two separate steps. So let's try this. We'll say test choice editor component. I'm just going to stash these changes to make sure the test still passes. It does. Git stash pop. There's that to do. I'll commit that to do. And then as a separate commit, I'm going to say remove unnecessary label extractor, because that's the default label extractor used by the child component, so we didn't actually need that in there. The key extractor might be the default as well. Let me see that. Drop down field. Option key, option label. Okay, yeah, so that is not the default. That does need to be there. I'm not sure if the test covers it or not. But regardless, that's okay. All right, so I want to look at that native select component. Native select. User experience can be improved on mobile using the native select on the platform. We allow that component. Let's just see what that looks like. It's called native select. Let's just see what happens. Let's see what we need to tweak. Native select. I'm not sure if the props are the same, but our tests will help us with that. Save. Let's see if the tests pass. Failed to parse a file. Oh yeah, closing. Li cannot appear as a child of select. Maybe the menu option is a problem here. So let's check the MUI docs. I'm actually really glad that one of the testing tools here has given us this feedback, so we get valid HTML. Yes, so for native select, it's supposed to be options with values and with labels. So let's give that a try. So this needs to be an option. This needs to be an option. Save. React does not recognize the label ID prop on a DOM element. Specify it as a lowercase label ID. Okay, so label ID. Huh. What DOM element is that on? Input base div label ID. Oh, maybe that's this, native select with the label ID. So the way I was pointing this to this is that direction. That's, I think native select, can native select have a label? Let's see. These are the things we got to figure out. Looks like no. The label goes separately from it there. So this could be getting into more changes that I want to do, but I at least want to see if I can get the test passing to show that. And then I'll see if I have more that I want to mess around with. HTML4 uncontrolled native. Input props ID. Yeah, so okay, so it's specifying that in the other direction. We can say label ID. What's label ID? Select ID. Let's say HTML4 equals select ID, and then that ID is there. I'm not actually sure why we had that in the other direction before. Maybe unnecessary. All right, some of our tests are passing. Others are not. So user click get by role option. So it's the interactive tests that call set value that are not passing. And I think I ran across this before when I made this change. I don't remember what project it was in, where instead of doing this, there was a different user event thing that you called. So let's try this here. User event. User event. Is it a utility API or is it a convenience API? Select options. Yeah. So there's select options is a event. It is a user event method that you call to select options or an option from a list. And this has to do with the fact that it's sort of a built-in DOM element instead of just arbitrary DOM that's being done. So let me try this. Say, oh wait, user select options screen get by role combo box name label. I don't know if that's the right role. List box. Yeah, it looks like the role is list box. Oh, I don't know if it is list box though. Well, we'll see. We'll get good output from React testing library if this is not right. And then, even though it's options plural, we can say, I think we just say banana there. I think we can just put the label, but we'll see. Calls one, but it was called with undefined. Interesting. So something happened there. What is the something that happened there? Let's do this. Console log on value change choice. Value change undefined. Okay, so down at this lower level, this other component that I have, on change equals handle change. So let's say console log handle change events. Target event target. So yeah, now that this is a real DOM element, something is different here. HTML select element. I don't know what the value is. Does the select have a value? 345. Oh, so the select has a value, and that value is a number. That's what's in the DOM. Versus, I think with the select, I guess it gave you the full object back or something. I have to look into that and see. Like, to do, find out with plain select, do we get the full object back? That's just some uncertainty I have about that. But yeah, it looks like we got the value already, and so we would just return. Oh, but then the option. Value, key extractor. Oh, no. This is what's expected. But then options. So it seems like so 345. Why is it not finding that? Key extractor. This is not needed. By default is key. Oh, is my test not doing that? Editor component. Key extractor is choice ID. New value. New value. Come on, new value. Tell me what this is. I'm missing something obvious about why this is not matching up. New value. Oh, is new value a string? It's a string. Yeah, right, because those attributes in HTML are strings, which is interesting actually because I'm not using TypeScript. It's actually strings in the running app. That's interesting. So do I put in code here to handle the weird ambiguity in my code? This is all very strange, exactly how to approach it. So let me think about this. String new value. Console log option. Key extractor. Okay, no, that's what needs to be converted to a string. And it's found. That test is passing. So great. Call set value with undefined if the user chooses the empty option. So I wonder why that one's not passing. So let's see. Oh, but so to go back to it, so this has worked. Like we have been able to, we had to change the API that was used in user event to interact with it, but that was able to successfully get it calling with the right value back. Now let's try this failing test, see if we can get it passing. Oh, and we probably, yeah, I mean, we probably want select options instead. Choose, and I wouldn't be surprised if this works right away, although it might not. Value choose, not found in options. 2 closing parentheses. That was a typo. And it works. We can get rid of that console log. That test passes. Let's make sure all the tests pass. They do. And so I did need to change the interaction steps that are used. I might have been able to find a way that works with both. But basically I'm changing to a native select because I want the interaction with the DOM to be different. And so that's sort of a desired change. Let's see how it looks in the app to see if I actually want to stick with this. I'll probably need to at least do experimentation on mobile off of the stream to see if that works okay. But let's see what we have. So it looks different, but I think I've maybe seen that can change as well. But let's just try it. Clearly the drop-down style is the normal built-in OS style. But let's see if we change it to morning. Did that work? It did work. Day. Yeah. Empty. Empty. So let's see quickly if we could get the style looking the same. And of course, we don't have any tests that specify the styling that shows up, because that's not something that's very useful to have a behavioral test in. But yeah, native select. Let's check the native select API to see. Children classes, I can input unchanged value variant. So are we setting the variant here? We were defaulting, so we were using the default variant before. So let's see the select and what variant it has. Default is outlined. Native select It doesn't say what the default is. So let's say variant equals outlined. See how that looks. It doesn't. Native select. Let me see if I can interact with it here. If I can edit it. Maybe on Code Sandbox. Running. Are we running? Can't see. Well, it's not coming up. There we go. That variant did not work. What about filled? Yeah, so that visually does not look the same. That looks different. Maybe when I click on it? Yeah, the filled kind of changes the background, but there's some non-trivial differences there. So I'm not sure if I'm going to go with that or not. I mean, I do want the UI to look consistently, but this is at least illustrated what it looks like to change implementation. So changing to another component, in this case, required changes to the assertions a little bit, but still overall the edge cases were covered, and it caught something where something was not being mapped correctly that we would need to change. I think I am going to roll those back though. Yeah, native select. Yeah, let's not go with that. All right, our editor component is pretty covered, and let's look it over to see if there's anything else we think is missing. We're looking up the choices. We're making sure the value is set. We're sending the value back. Key extractor. I think, I kind of glossed over that before. This might break a test if I remove this. It might just give us a warning in the UI as far as things, but I think the way we're looking things up the key extractor, I think we'll have a test fail if I remove that. Each child on the list should have a unique key prop, so that's already one thing that needs to happen. A component is changing from uncontrolled to be controlled. That's also a problem. And also the right elements are not found. So several things are happening with key extractor, and so that is in fact needed, so we've confirmed that that's covered. And I think I'll remove that to do for now, because we don't want to do that at this point. All right, that's some good test coverage there. Let me think back about my list of things that I wanted the option to be able to change and see how our test coverage has helped with that. Yeah, I guess maybe in the meantime, let me just run my Cypress test to make sure that we haven't broken anything at that level. And I should run our whole test suite as well. So running all of our components, all of our jest tests here, they're all passing. There's those to-dos for those kind of low-level functions that I want to do. But let's run our Cypress test to make sure that that's all still good as well. Yeah, so looking over it, I've been hoping to identify bugs in edge cases, and we found one of those actually, a call that was sending bad data to the server. That was usually fine if you finished typing the data afterwards, but because it could have caused issues for users. Refactoring code to be simpler, so we removed a little bit of props there. I think it was maybe just one prop that wasn't needed because it was the default. I'd like to be able to extract vanilla JavaScript out of React, and so let's take a look at the code. So far, this is pretty simple. I mean, there's some trivial functions here that are being passed in, but maybe this on change, it has a condition. Maybe it would make sense to pull that out, but still the usage of that is just so coupled to this component, and the testing of it was straightforward enough that I think that's not needed to be pulled out. And in the choice, again, just very, very trivial JavaScript here. So I can't really see anything here in these components that I would pull out to vanilla JavaScript. I would bet that kind of the higher level components in my application for like screens and parts of screens might very well have vanilla JavaScript that we could pull out. I see here that my Cypress suite has passed, and so we're in good shape. There's one skipped because I got to figure out what to do there. That's a case I was having trouble testing in Cypress, but maybe my component test will help me cover it. Remove unnecessary dependencies. Haven't got to that point at this point, but if we get to a point where I can remove something, where I see something's being imported that could be removed, maybe we'd be able to get away with that. Maybe at a lower level like this drop-down field. Day.js we're definitely going to need. We're relying on that. And changing the styling approach to plain CSS. We played around with that a bit in terms of not quite getting there, but in terms of going from the custom select element that's used by MUI to going to a native select instead. And we saw that our tests were able to help us with that and give us confidence that the cases were covered. There's just a visual issue in this case that I need to look into. That's not really related to testing, but so I could just look into that. And so if I found that MUI helped there, I could go there. I think I might actually move away from MUI instead to some plain CSS styling, if I can, to improve the performance of my app. So I'm not really looking to look into native select more in depth at this point. But that's been some of our test coverage adding. Oh, I should, before we end the stream, talk about the jest coverage flag. So if we do yarn test, this helps us confirm how much coverage we have, and maybe we'll find some things that I missed. It'll be very embarrassing for me, which is totally fine. So we have our yarn test watch all, but yarn will pass along additional flags as well. So we can say yarn test coverage. This is a built-in flag that's built into Jest by default, and I'm pretty sure it's turned on by default. That's going to do a coverage check of our components, of all of our files. So let's see what happens when I run it, and I may need to drill down into more details. It's going to run my test suite as usual, and then we get the full outage as far as if they passed or failed, but we also get this table. This is a coverage table. And so it shows of the files that are touched by these tests. I don't think it shows every file, but it shows what percentage of things are covered. So you can see that some of these low-level things that I've tested are getting 100% covered. Values is not, so I'll want to come back and revisit that. The columns in terms of number of statements, branches, functions, and lines. And so, yeah, let's check out here. Source components drop-down field. That's the lower level, but we looked at field types, choice. Oh yeah, date editor component. So field types, lazy date editor component, we're getting 100% coverage there, so that's pretty nice. But then in choice, we're only getting 60%, 0% of branches. Wow, that's not very good. So let's try to get some more detail. I think this should be outputting some stuff. Riverbed, personal, Riverbed, web. No, web, not webhooks. Coverage, yes, so this coverage directory is outputted. lcov report, and we get some HTML here. So let's open this. Hopefully it opens in a reasonable browser. And now we're getting some more detailed information we can drill down on. Field types, choice. And so check it out. Now we have the actual lines that are being shown here, and we're getting output where it's saying, hey, these are not being hit at all. I don't remember the color off the top of my head, but format value and get sort value are not being covered at all by test. And that's known, actually we know that. That's the to-dos we have here. So when I implement these to-dos, that will start looking better. We also have in yellow here a default that's not being covered. This is basically saying, and let me see if I can parse this JavaScript. If we have field attributes options, no, if we don't have field attributes, if we have field attributes but we don't have options, it's filling in a default there. And so that's a case where that just hasn't been set on the server-side data yet. And so we can cover that with a test. So an important note to make about code coverage. And I was thinking about this because this is, for a while I was pretty opposed to code coverage tools, but then I opened up to it a bit more. So people have said these things. I'm not the first one to come up with it, but I figured out a helpful way to say it, which is this. Code coverage, the term code coverage sounds like you're saying, oh, is this line covered by test? Is this code covered by test? But there's actually two different things. What code coverage tools show you is this code executed by the test? So this is saying, hey, the format value function is not executed by a test at all. So if that's the case, you know that you're not testing it well, and maybe that's intentional, maybe it's not. But it doesn't confirm that the behavior of it is covered. Because if we just called format value and did nothing with the result, then the code coverage tool would say, yep, this is covered by test. But what it means is that function is, or that line is executed by a test. it doesn't mean that you're correctly specifying the behavior. So an automated tool, at least the ones that I know about, can't do that for you. And so you need to think still, even if you're using a code coverage tool, you need to think, am I specifying the behavior correctly? And specifying the behavior is what we've been doing this whole time together on the stream. So code coverage tools can show you if something is not executed at all, but if it is executed, that doesn't demonstrate that you're testing that case well. But let's just briefly do that. Let's get this, since this is in the component that we are testing, let's get this branch, this sort of defaulting branch covered, executed, and let's make sure we actually specify that behavior well. So let's think about that here. That is in choice. And I think this is basically when choices is missing. This is also going to be shows only the default option when options are missing. So this is options null. And I think the behavior should be all the same here, but this is the case that we're talking about here. So our test suite is small, so if I just save this and it reruns, it'll test if it fails. Oh yeah, it does. Okay, okay, interesting. So our code is blown up. Can it read properties of null, reading choices? Now I wonder if I'm actually covering, I think I might actually just want attributes to be empty. So let's see. Yeah, so that test does pass. And now choice, well, that's not looking, well, I don't know. We know that some of those functions are not still covered. So let me reload this. And now it's actually showing not as yellow anymore. So we're successfully hitting this case. And let me think very hard again about this nested structure. Field attributes options. Options is not there, so we're setting the default for options to be the empty object. So that's why, oops, I'm opening a book here. That's why this covers it. And so this makes sense. This is a realistic scenario in the application because on the server side, it doesn't know what all the different things are configured. It doesn't know when you might have a choice field. And so the attributes by default are empty for a field on the server side. The way the data structure works on the server, attributes will never be missing. That will always be there. So this is an appropriate server-side thing. Something might actually blow up if that's not covered. So it's actually added value here because, basically, I added in this defaulting for some reason. Probably at the time I thought that it was needed. Maybe I saw something blowing up. But what the code coverage tool has done has told me, it's like, hey, I see a branch. This is actually a code branch, although it's kind of surprising. It's a defaulting behavior. So there's the branch when the value is there, and there's the branch where the default is used. And so the code coverage tool told me, hey, Josh, like you're not actually executing that default branch in your test. Maybe you want to do so. And so now I have a test for that, which actually documents that and ensures that it works the way I expect. Because just because this gets executed, it doesn't mean that something else doesn't blow up or behave the way that I don't want. So I'm confirming here that when the options are missing, we still get this, it's just a choose behavior there. That means when someone first chooses a choice field, that's going to work. So this is valuable. I find value in the code coverage tool pushing me towards actually covering that case with a test. That was really great. And it'll be great once I get format value and get sort value covered as well, that those will be shown in the test tool as 100% covered. And so, although you don't just want to go for the numbers with code coverage tools, you want to think about correctly specifying the behavior as well. But a code coverage tool can tell you about cases that you missed. And that's the thing that I didn't get at first, that I find some value in code coverage tools with. So that feels like a good stopping point for the stream. We've been going for several hours now. And so, yeah, I want to say thanks to everybody that's been watching live. I want to say thanks to anybody checking out the video later. I'm going to put up the full version of this video, and then maybe I'll edit out portions as well for like little snippets that might be useful. But we've been exploring together adding this code coverage to a React project. It can be really great to add that test coverage from the start, especially for commercial applications where you know you're going to go with it, you know you're going to be using React and it's straightforward. But in my case, where I wasn't sure of the framework I wanted to use, and in fact I did change it, I waited for things to stabilize on this experimental project for a bit. Now I'm going back in and adding in the test coverage. And being careful is important. We saw together that I needed to make sure when I saw a test that was green, I needed to make sure to break the functionality to make sure the test was really catching something. And I even saw some surprising cases where tests were passing where I didn't think that they would be. And we had to think about that. But by applying that extra effort, we're able to get good test coverage, not just in terms of executed statements, but in terms of really specifying the behavior. And I was very excited that even in our little bit of time together, we found some places where we were able to make some improvements. We were able to refactor. We were able to simplify some code. We caught a bug that was not covered before, at least some unfortunate, undesired behavior. And we got some to-dos for larger refactorings we can consider in the future. The to-dos that we can handle quickly, we handled together, but others we left to kind of revisit later. So yeah, this has been some great progress together. I want to thank everybody for joining in. I'll put back up on the screen real quick the book I have. So if you like what you've seen here together as far as deeply specifying the behavior, but you're wondering like, oh, how can I get into the mindset? It's just so hard when you've got a code working, you're adding in tests later, like, how do I think about, am I fully specifying the behavior? How am I sure that I've gotten there? Test-driven development is the way to get there, and that's what I highly recommend. And it's an important tool. It changes your mindset. And so many test-driven development influential people over the years have said the same thing, that once they've learned test-driven development, it affects their thinking when they're actively using it and when they're not actively using it. And so Outside In React Development is a book that I wrote and published to go through in-depth test-driven development in the React ecosystem. $10 off with that code right there, and it'll be in the video description as well. So check it out. Check out the free preview as well. And I want to say thank you again to TestDouble, where I work. It's just a great place to work, and I love that I get to work with people that care about software engineering to this degree, that they inspire me to work harder and try harder in architecting my code and testing my code. We'd love to join up with your team to help you do the same things. And so with that, I want to say thanks so much for joining in, and hope to do another one of these sometime soon. So we will see you next time. Thanks a lot. See ya.